A boy's fingers flew across a cracked laptop, lines of code glowing on the screen. Outside, thunderous Harleys roared past his window. No one knew this quiet kid's invention would one day save lives and earn the respect of men who trusted nothing but the road. Before we start this story, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Also, please subscribe to the channel. It will help us to bring you more inspiring stories every day. In the small town of Grey Ridge, tucked between rolling hills and endless highways, 14-year-old Mason Holt was known as the quiet kid with oversized glasses and second-hand clothes. While other teens played football or hung out at the gas station, Mason spent nights hunched over an aging laptop his uncle had rescued from a pawn shop. He wasn't a gamer. He wasn't a dreamer. He was a builder. Ever since his father had died in a road accident, lost on an unfamiliar route, Mason had been obsessed with maps, signals, and technology that could keep people from being swallowed by the unknown. On weekends, his mother, Dana, worked double shifts at the diner to keep food on their table. Mason would sit in the corner booth, sketching ideas while Harleys rumbled by outside. He watched the bikers with a mixture of fear and fascination. Their vests looked like armor, their roars like thunder. One day, he thought, I'll build something even they can't ignore. The idea struck him late one stormy night. Mason stared at a blinking cursor while listening to rain hammer against his window. His father's accident replayed in his mind, how emergency responders couldn't find the crash site for hours because cell service failed. What if there was a system that didn't need towers? What if bikers, travelers, even lost kids could ping each other without signal bars? He scribbled equations on scraps of paper, diagrams of satellites and mesh networks. His fingers flew over the keys, writing code that stitched together GPS data with peer-to-peer radio signals. He didn't know it yet, but he was building more than just an app. He was building a lifeline. By sunrise, a crude version blinked on his screen. It wasn't pretty, but when he tested it between his laptop and an old phone, a glowing dot moved on the digital map. Mason's chest tightened, like his father's voice whispering from beyond. Keep going, son. For weeks, Mason refined the program. He skipped meals, traded sleep for coding marathons, and used diner tips his mother slipped him to buy cheap parts online. Slowly, the app evolved. It could track moving riders, reroute around accidents, and even send silent distress alerts when a biker crashed. Mason tested it on his bike, a rusty mountain cycle. He strapped his phone to the handlebars, pedaling across town while the GPS dot traced faithfully on his laptop back home. It works, he whispered, breathless under the stars. But who would listen to a kid with no money, no reputation, and no license? One evening, Mason overheard a conversation at the diner. A group of bikers sat in the corner, leather vests gleaming, voices rough as gravel. One word made Mason's ears burn: Hell's Angels. He watched their captain, a broad man with a salt and pepper beard named Riker Malone. Mason didn't know it yet, but fate was already weaving their paths together. The chance came suddenly. A storm swept across Grey Ridge, knocking out power and flooding roads. Mason sat in the diner with his mother when the doors slammed open. Bikers stumbled in, soaked, tense. Their radios had gone silent. One of their riders, a younger man named Cole, hadn't made it back from the ridge. Search parties were useless, no signal, no clear trails. Mason's heart raced. His fingers itched. He pulled his laptop from his backpack, the screen flickering to life. I can help, he stammered, voice cracking. The room turned to him, laughter bubbling from some. Kid, this ain't video games, one muttered. But Riker's eyes narrowed, studying Mason's shaking hands. What do you got, boy? Mason swallowed. An app. It doesn't need towers. It finds people. Silence. Then, with a slow nod, Riker motioned him over. For the first time, Mason's invention would face the storm, not on paper, not on pedals, but on the open road. They huddled around Mason's laptop, the glow reflecting in their hardened faces. He tapped the screen nervously. showing a blinking dot moving along the ridge's outline. "That's him," Mason said, voice trembling. Skeptics muttered, but Riker barked, "Mount up." Engines thundered as the Angels roared back into the night, Mason clutching his laptop in the diner doorway. Minutes felt like hours. Rain lashed the windows, his stomach twisting with doubt. What if it failed? What if Cole didn't make it back? Then, through the storm, headlights cut across the street. The bikers returned, surrounding Cole's battered but breathing body. The room erupted, shouts, claps on backs, relief heavy in the air. Riker stepped forward, dripping water, eyes locked on Mason. "Kid, you just gave us something no patch ever has. You gave us a lifeline." For the first time since his father's death, Mason felt the weight of loss ease. His invention had worked, and it had saved a life. The next morning, Mason woke to the rumble of engines outside his house. He peeked through the curtain. Half a dozen Harleys lined the street, chrome glinting in the early sun. Riker Malone stood at the front, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the boys' porch. Mason's mother, Dana, stepped outside, apron still dusted with flour from her diner shift. She froze when she saw the bikers. "We need your boy," Riker said calmly. Dana's protective instincts flared. "He's just a kid." Riker nodded, his voice low but steady. "Yeah, but last night that kid saved one of ours." Mason stepped onto the porch, laptop clutched to his chest. For the first time, fear didn't outweigh determination. He had something real to offer, something men built on trust and loyalty couldn't ignore. Dana searched her son's eyes. He only nodded, silently pleading. Reluctantly, she stepped aside. Riker gave Mason the faintest smile. "Come on, kid. You ride with us today." They roared down the highway. Mason tucked into the sidecar of Riker's Harley, laptop balanced on his knees. The wind tore at his hair, the vibration of the engine rattling his bones. Yet in that chaos, Mason felt alive. His app tracked their movements in real time, each rider a glowing dot weaving across the map. Riker glanced down at the screen as Mason pointed. Dead zone ahead. Roads washed out. "Take the detour left." Riker barked the command through hand signals, the riders adjusting seamlessly. Minutes later, they bypassed a collapsed bridge that would have stranded them for hours. The bikers exchanged glances, skepticism turning into trust. By the time they reached their clubhouse, Mason's app had proven itself more than once. He wasn't just tagging along, he was guiding them. When they parked, a young rider clapped Mason's shoulder. "Kid, that thing's witchcraft." Mason grinned shyly. For the first time, he felt part of something bigger than himself. Inside the clubhouse, smoke curled through the air, mingling with the scent of oil and leather. Mason sat nervously at a scarred wooden table, his laptop open, while grizzled bikers leaned over to watch the glowing screen. He explained in simple words how the app worked, how it used satellites, mesh signals, and emergency pings. Some shook their heads not understanding the tech, but all understood one thing: it worked. Cole, the rider who'd been rescued, raised his glass in Mason's direction. "I wouldn't be here if not for him." The room erupted in cheers, but not everyone was convinced. An older biker named Vance, with steel-gray hair and wary eyes, leaned close to Riker. "Trusting a kid with our lives? Dangerous." Riker didn't respond. He just studied Mason, who sat small in his chair but carried a fire in his eyes. Finally, Riker spoke, his voice heavy with authority. "We trust him because he's already proven it." Days turned into weeks. Mason rode often with the Angels, updating the app after every ride. He added crash detection, route sharing, even coded a red flash alert when a rider went down. The bikers started relying on it, not just in storms but in daily runs across county lines. Slowly, respect replaced doubt. Mason became their tech kid, a title spoken with half teasing, half pride. At the diner, townsfolk watched with disbelief as Angels parked outside just to wave Mason in. Dana worried for her son, worried about the world he was stepping into, but even she couldn't deny the fire in his eyes. One evening she found him at the kitchen table, coding with tired but joyful focus. "You've changed," she whispered. Mason looked up, blinking behind his glasses. "No, Mom. I finally feel like me." His words carried the weight of a boy stepping out of grief into purpose, and though she feared the risks, she quietly smiled. Then came the night everything changed. A charity ride organized by the Angels drew bikers from 3 counties. The procession stretched for miles, headlights glowing like a river of fire against the dusk. Mason's app tracked every rider flawlessly. But halfway through the ridge, disaster struck. A semi-truck jackknifed on the wet highway, blocking the path. Panic spread as bikes screeched to a halt. Radios crackled with static. Mason's heart pounded. This was the kind of chaos that had cost his father's life. His fingers flew across the laptop, rerouting the riders through a backwoods trail he'd mapped weeks before. "Follow the red line!" he shouted, holding up the screen. Riker trusted him instantly, signaling the pack. Engines roared, riders swerved, and one by one hundreds of bikers escaped the trap. By the time sirens wailed in the distance, the Angels were already safe. Riker dismounted, gripping Mason's shoulder hard. "Kid, tonight you didn't just save us. You saved our way of life." The news spread faster than exhaust smoke. Local papers wrote about the mystery GPS that guided hundreds of bikers through a deadly highway block. Though Mason's name wasn't mentioned, whispers in Greyridge told the truth. At the diner, strangers nodded at him with quiet respect. But with attention came shadows. Vance, the skeptical older biker, confronted Riker one evening. "Technology invites risk. What if cops get hold of it? What if rivals hack it?" Riker stayed calm, his gravel voice steady. "This ain't about tech, Vance. It's about trust. That boy's already proven more loyal than men with patches." Mason overheard, his heart thudding. He wasn't blind. He knew he'd stepped into a world balanced on trust and danger. Still, when he looked at Cole laughing with his brothers, alive because of him, Mason clenched his fists. He wasn't going to walk away, not now. Not ever. One night Mason sat by his window, laptop glowing in the dark. Notifications pinged as he tested a new update. A distress beacon that sent out a rider's exact location with one tap. Suddenly his phone buzzed. It was Riker. "We've got trouble." Mason's pulse spiked. The Angels were pinned on a remote road, their radios dead. Without hesitation, Mason traced their GPS signals. His fingers blurred as he sent reroutes and alerts, guiding them through back trails. For over an hour, Mason directed the convoy from his bedroom, eyes darting between lines of code and blinking dots. Finally, the pack broke free. Exhausted but triumphant, Mason slumped in his chair. Minutes later, headlights flooded his yard. Riker stood in the glow, helmet under his arm. He didn't say a word. He just placed a heavy biker's ring on the boy's desk. The engraved letters were clear, AFA. Always, forever, forever, always. Brotherhood wasn't just earned on the road. The next day, Mason walked through town wearing the ring on a chain around his neck. Kids who once teased him for being the quiet nerd now stared in awe. At the diner, Dana tried to hide her tears as bikers filled the booths, treating Mason like one of their own. But Mason didn't bask in pride, he felt responsibility. He knew every update mattered. Every line of code could mean life or death. That night he worked tirelessly, refining encryption, protecting signals from prying eyes. Outside, the roar of engines reminded him he wasn't working alone anymore. Riker checked in often, sometimes with a quiet nod, sometimes with a gruff "proud of you, kid." For a boy who had grown up fatherless, those words stitched wounds no medicine could. The world saw bikers as outlaws. Mason saw them as guardians of the road. And for the first time, he felt like he had a father figure again. But storms test every bridge. One evening, rival riders known as the Iron Vultures hacked Mason's trial network. Darts disappeared from the screen, replaced with false signals. Panic surged. If riders followed the wrong trail, they could end up ambushed. Mason's hands shook, sweat dripping onto his keyboard. "Think, Mason. Think, he whispered. With heart racing, he rewrote code in real time, blocking corrupted signals and isolating the real ones. Hours blurred as he battled hackers line by line, his laptop heating under the strain. Finally, the true paths reappeared. The angels escaped the trap, but the scare left Riker grim. He pulled Mason aside, voice heavy. Kid, your app ain't just ours anymore. Rivals know it. That makes you a target. Mason swallowed hard. For the first time, he realized this wasn't just about invention. It was about survival. Still, he looked Riker in the eye and said, Then I'll fight harder. For you, for all of you. After the attack, Mason doubled down. He fortified the app with firewalls, encrypted pings and backup layers. But it wasn't just code anymore. It was brotherhood encoded into digital lines. The angels began to call it their lifeline, trusting it more with each ride. At a gathering, Marshall Kane, a senior chapter president, clasped Mason's shoulder. Boy patches can be earned, but trust? That's rarer than gold. You've given us both. Mason felt the weight of those words heavier than any medal. Dana still worried, but she couldn't deny the glow in her son's eyes. He wasn't the boy haunted by his father's accident anymore. He was a builder of futures. As torches lit the night, engines rumbled in salute, echoing across the hills. Mason stood in the middle, clutching his laptop like it was armor. For once, the quiet boy didn't feel small. He felt unbreakable, because now an entire brotherhood rode with him. Spring arrived in Grey Ridge, and with it came the biggest charity ride the town had ever seen. Hundreds of bikers lined the streets, engines growling in harmony. Mason stood at the front, laptop balanced on a stand rigged to Riker's Harley. The app tracked every rider, blinking dots like constellations across the map. Townsfolk cheered, children waved, and Dana stood near the diner, pride shining in her eyes. The convoy stretched for miles, moving like a river of chrome and steel. Suddenly Mason noticed a red alert flashing. One rider had gone down on a back trail. Without hesitation, Mason directed a recovery team, his voice steady as commands flowed. Within minutes, the downed rider was lifted safely into an ambulance. Relief rippled through the pack. As the ride continued, Mason realized something profound. This wasn't just code anymore. It was a living bond, a safety net woven between men and machines, stitched together by trust. That night, the angels gathered around a bonfire at their clubhouse, flames casting shadows across patched leather and scarred faces. Mason sat beside Riker, laptop closed for once. Marshall Kane rose, raising a glass. To a boy who turned grief into something that'll outlive us all. Mason Holt, you gave us more than a tool, you gave us each other. The bikers roared in approval, engines revving in salute. Mason's chest swelled, tears pricking his eyes. He remembered being the invisible kid at school, the one who carried loss quietly. Now he was part of something unbreakable. Riker leaned close, his gravel voice softer than Mason had ever heard. Your dad would be proud, kid. You gave the road a second heartbeat. Mason stared into the fire, feeling warmth seep into places long frozen. For the first time, he didn't feel like he was chasing his father's memory. He felt like he was riding alongside it. Weeks later, Mason and Riker stopped at the cemetery on the outskirts of town. The boy knelt by his father's headstone, the biker standing respectfully behind. Mason placed the ring, the one engraved with Affa, at the base of the stone. I wanted you to know, Dad, he whispered. I built something that keeps them safe. It's because of you. Riker's hand rested gently on Mason's shoulder, a silent promise of protection. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the faint echo of distant engines. Mason closed his eyes, imagining his father smiling somewhere beyond the horizon. As they walked back to the Harley, Riker handed the ring back. Keep it. It belongs to you now. Mason slipped it around his neck again, heart steady. The patch, the app, the brotherhood, all of it had become more than steel and code. It was family. A family born not of blood, but of sacrifice and love. Summer rides stretched across counties, and word of the app spread. Other chapters adopted it, calling it their digital guardian. Mason updated constantly, answering calls from bikers he'd never met, his invention saving lives miles away. But no matter how wide it spread, Greyridge remained home, the place where it all began. At the diner, Mason often sat in his corner booth coding while Ethan, Cole, and other kids crowded around, curious. Dana poured coffee for bikers and locals alike, the once divided town now bound by a strange unity. Engines no longer drew suspicion, they drew gratitude. Mason had changed more than one brotherhood. He'd changed an entire community. And though danger still lurked from rivals and roads alike, Mason knew one truth. He wasn't alone anymore. Every dot on that glowing map wasn't just a signal, it was a heartbeat. And every heartbeat reminded him that even the smallest voice could echo like thunder. One late evening, Mason sat on the porch as Riker pulled up, headlights washing over the yard. "Ride?" Riker asked, tossing him a spare helmet. Mason grinned, slipping it on. Together they roared into the night, the boys' laughter carried by the wind. They stopped at the ridge where stars spilled endlessly overhead. Mason opened the app, watching the glowing dots of riders moving across the map like a galaxy of chrome. Riker looked out over the horizon. "You didn't just give us a lifeline, kid. You gave us a future." Mason closed the laptop, letting silence and starlight speak louder than words. In that moment, with the hum of cooling engines and the vastness of the sky above, he finally understood. He hadn't just built an app. He'd built a brotherhood. A quiet boy's code became a biker's lifeline. Mason turned grief into hope, and in return found a family on the road.